Good morning. Wow, how incredible is this? I am so grateful and absolutely delighted to welcome each one of you to this online conversation with technology thought leader and advisor Kamal Ramsingh. My name is Mariana and I will be your host for this morning. I am the founder and owner of Mariana Carroll Consulting. Our aim is simple. We want to be your technology consulting and training partner of choice. We love to add value, to build trust, and to act with integrity. We truly strive for excellence in all we do and like to try new and different things. I'm truly of the opinion that nothing is impossible. Not to say that it's always easy, but I just love that we get to take some time out of our very busy schedules to learn from each other, to perhaps hear some different perspectives and to just gain some new insights. I hope that this will be an hour well spent for each one of you. Thank you so much for joining us. So now I have the incredible honor to introduce our guest speaker of the morning. He is a very good friend of mine, a mentor to me, an incredible thought leader, a fantastic facilitator and presenter, and one of the best technology advisors and consultants I know, with a breadth of industry knowledge and years of experience, Kamal Ramsingh. Kamal led the Deloitte Consulting Technology team as a Senior Director in the Technology Services area within Deloitte Consulting for Africa, for the African operations for the last 6 years. Prior to Deloitte, Kamal assumed the position of Chief Operating Officer of a listed company called Semeca BSG. The cluster of businesses under his oversight contributed more than about 50% of the listed group's revenues and profits. Kamal is also highly educated, so he holds a BSc in Computer Science from the University of Natal and also a Master's in Business Leadership. Then Kamal is also the owner and founder of CIO Anywhere and currently acts as a specialist advisor to a number of organizations across different industry verticals, and he's also a mentor to several growing ICT services firms. Kamal, it is really such an honor to have you share your insights and experiences and just valuable knowledge around, especially for today's conversation, IT staffing and skills planning, and when we look into the future organization and the IT considerations around that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing and just contributing to this conversation as well. We are truly looking forward to a very insightful hour.
Thanks, Mariana. And thanks for helping me make my personal history, because I've spoken all across the continent on these trends, and it's the first time I'm doing a webinar. So thank you very much.
That's fantastic. So just before I hand over to Kamal and we can start our conversation, I think let's just set the scene for the discussion this morning specifically. So, I mean, as you all know, and you're experiencing it on a daily basis, we live in this rapidly changing world where there's this constant need to cut costs and where IT investments is no longer just around only technologies, but there's a discussion around value delivery, lean IT, being agile all the time, producing efficiencies. So I think we all can agree that the role of the IT organization is definitely changing. And I think you should also agree that the primary role of IT traditionally, if we think back, was always around just supporting some business operations. But I think what we've now been seeing, especially when we think about the digital marketplace and the role that technology is playing, is that technology is becoming the driver for things like agility, efficiencies, effectiveness, and even better performance through mobility and all those new emerging technologies that is now really changing, I think, the trajectory of our organizations. It is a landscape, I think, where IT has now actually moved beyond just being an enablement function to one that actually enables growth and are introducing new ways of working into the organization. to truly become that value-adding business partner that we've all been talking about so many times. Or at least I think that is what most IT execs would aspire to. Business users, I think, are much more educated on technology than in our traditional environments. They are using smart apps in their daily personal lives. And I think that also creates this demand for more efficiencies, mobility, things like artificial intelligence, automation, innovation. I think we can name all of those things. And I think that demand is also growing at a staggering rate. The IT executive and their teams, I think, are really at a crossroad where they can either choose to change with the times and to stay relevant in this digital age, or I assume the flip side of that would be to not respond, but I don't know if they might then perhaps soon find themselves to be redundant. So with that being said, I would actually love to hear from all of you in the audience. So if we are considering this crossroad, we can either choose to change and stay relevant, or choose not to respond and wait and see where that would take us. Let's just look at this question. So do you actually see a need for the IT organization of today to change and to transform to be future fit? So I'm not sure what you guys would think about this. Is it definitely, yes, we already have a digital transformation program and strategy in place, or we know we need to change, but we don't really know where to start or where to actually just embark on this journey. Or maybe we have some discussions, but it's not really a key priority for us at this point. There's more burning issues that we need to deal with. Or no, we don't see this as a key thing, and we just need to get our heads down and focus on what is important today. So we can see, which is very interesting, and I think that's very, very good to actually see, that most of you actually indicated definitely you already have a digital transformation program and a strategy in place. So you already embarked on this journey, and that's actually great to see. It is the flip side is also true that some discussions, but not part of the key strategy yet. But I think that also just paints the picture in terms of this great need that everyone is talking about. Change is needed, and I think we all agree on that. I think if we start thinking about change from an IT perspective and a technology perspective, we will all agree that it's not just a switch that we can turn on or off. We actually do need to do some planning and think strategically about this thing. So it's a journey of true transformation, and I think not earmarked only by agile delivery models or new cloud-based models or some of the new technology trends, but one where I believe the IT team and the IT structure, and from a talent and just skills perspective, also needs some considerations. So I also want to pose another question to you, and that's just around, what do you believe would be some of the greatest drivers for change in your organization? What is that one thing that really drive this transformation and change in the organization? Is it related to cost, to growth or innovation? Is it based on customer experience and being more customer-centric, perhaps productivity and efficiencies? Or is it this whole thing around talent, performance, and skills within the organization? So I think, not surprising, business growth and innovation, I think that truly also links nicely back to this transformation journey that we're on. I'm very keen to see that there's actually 25% saying productivity and efficiency. As we all know, we need to drive that productivity, and that also links back to the cost conversation. And then I'm very glad to see the 25% saying talent and performance management, because as you all know, even though we know there's a number of key considerations to take into account, like the infrastructure, security, data, integration, complexity, legacy, and all those things, I really think one of the conversations that doesn't get the attention that it deserves is this whole thing around the people aspect, especially when it comes to the future organization. And that's, even though we do acknowledge that there's many more. I think the conversation this morning is really focused around the people aspect and just looking at our future staffing models and how do we actually plan appropriately to move our existing capabilities and skills into this future state and the future organization that we see. So with that being said, I think the scarcity of technical talent is a significant concern across many of the industries. I mean, we have had many discussions around this whole issue around talent management, performance management, and how do we actually gear up in terms of skills? How do we actually understand to have people with a specific skill set that doesn't exist today? I think we see that especially evident in the African continent as well. We see IT legacy skill workforce is nearing retirement. Our educational systems are not always up to scratch. We see a lot of job hopping. I think that's truly in the order of the day. And I think all of those things are really contributing to this massive skills gap that we are currently seeing. So considering this changing role of IT and this gap that is widening from a skills and capabilities perspective, there's three key things that comes to mind for me in this ever-changing game. The one is just how do we navigate this ever-increasing, volatile, sometimes uncertain, complex and ambiguous expectations that the business would set on technology. The second thing is how do we create this lasting business value that everyone is so after? I mean, from a strategic perspective, how do we make sure that whatever we do from a transformational and skills perspective is adequately aligned to really adding back to the organization and making sure there's proper alignment to their key initiatives and priorities? And then lastly, and the key question, who do we bring along on this journey? So who do you currently have? Do they have the right skills? Have you actually considered the skills and talent requirements for your organization in 2 or 3 years from now? And what is that gap and how do we actually address that specific gap? So this conversation this morning will attempt to answer these questions. So we'll start off with some key strategic just considerations and the potential for change. We'll look at some of the key considerations and Kamal's view on business expectation and what will drive us to become a successful IT organization in the future. And then lastly, just addressing this people question around who do we bring along and how do we embark on just closing or trying to close the skills gap. So Kamal, I think we've seen from the participants that productivity and cost and I think all those conversations around efficiencies and this need for change is really a big factor. I think we've also seen a relative reluctance to change or even to start thinking about the implications of change and to think, to actually just prove ourselves to be future fit and already start with some of the planning in terms of the strategy when we think about the organization in 2 or 3 years from now. So getting us from where we are today to this envisioned future state, if we are assuming that we need to change, do you believe there is even a need to consider change? Why can't we just keep on doing what we always did? And why can't we just do business as usual?
Thanks for that introduction, Mariana. I think you've covered a lot of the very salient points, the African perspectives and so forth. So I think the first thing to acknowledge from an IT organization point of view is this question of staffing, the appropriate mix of skills, the appropriate expanse of skills and the right experience. This has been an ongoing challenge for as long as I've been in IT, which has been a reasonably long time. It's always been a challenge. And in South Africa, we've obviously had the additional complexity of transformation, which is still something most organizations are grappling with and will, I think, continue to grapple with for a little while to come yet. In parts of Africa, we're not even talking about scarcity of skills. We're talking about simple absence of skills. So we have a challenge without the additional variations that we've been speaking about in the past few minutes that you've been taking us through. But what's made this more critical of a conversation and more serious of an issue is everything else that's been changing. So we've always had the IT staffing challenge, and now we've got, to my mind, three material streams of shifts that are going on. The first big thing is the virtualization drive and software-defined everything, if you want to call it that. That is creating challenges at the data center level where you don't need to own data centers, you don't need to own a lot of what was traditionally in the IT organization anymore. And that's created a big drive for CIOs to reconsider things. The second thing we've obviously seen, and we'll talk a bit more about this when we look at the solutions, is how you employ skills is also changing. You needn't just employ people. You can use ecosystems, and we'll talk about some of the big brands who've issued their tech trends, their technology trends in the past few weeks. You don't have to employ people anymore to have access to capabilities. You can use crowdsourcing, fundamental opportunity for all African companies in the very near term. And of course, the big thing, which I'm personally very, very excited about, is when you engage with suppliers, the way in which suppliers are starting to appear is also changing. Because as organizations, and I've seen that majority of your attendees are talking about digital transformation journeys in play, that's exciting because as we get into this conversation of digitization or digitalization, and they're two different things, we're going to engage with people we've never engaged with before, because this entire digital landscape is given mandate and license to brands and organizations and skill sets which aren't the mainstream mega monolithic systems integration businesses. So imagine the poor CIO who spent the past half a decade getting organized, getting arranged, getting ready to deal with these big suppliers, to engage people in the traditional way, and to deal with data centers. And now these three things are happening, converging all at the same time. And you've got the staffing challenge. So the staffing challenge is now material because your strategy is effectively going to change as an organization, which means the CIO needs to realign the structure and the strategy and the staffing of the IT organization, which means material shakeup in how you constitute skills and what skills you constitute. So the option of doing nothing is no longer an option. It is now a material change that needs to be orchestrated, and it needs to happen as soon as possible.
That's fantastic. And I think this last point where you said we can't just do nothing. We truly need to actually be proactive and start thinking about and strategically actually plan, I think, for the changes that is ahead. And I think that also is exactly what we want to achieve by this conversation this morning, is to just think about ways of how we can do this and how we can be proactive and really start gearing ourselves up and not get to a place in a year or two from now where we almost just get ourselves in a place where we haven't thought about this appropriately and where we sit with people that might not be able to cope with all the changes that we see happening in this future organization. So I think before we move on to think about some of the key challenges and some of the key considerations that we might see happening from getting where we're at today to this envisioned future IT organization, I would like to ask a last question to the audience. And this is really around, if we think about this skills gap that we are talking about, in which area do you believe there would be the largest skills gap within the next 1 to 2 years? So if we think about where do we need to spend some time training up some of the people in our IT organization, in which area do you believe the biggest need would exist? Is it within cloud computing, cybersecurity, perhaps the whole data conversation, BI and big data, DevOps, or your solution architecture, or do you believe it's within mobility or perhaps digitalization? So what are your thoughts? What do you see as the biggest gap that we currently have in the IT organization? Okay, so what we see is a split between cybersecurity and mobility and digital. So there's definitely a great need for us to start gearing ourselves up in these two areas. and then also a split between big data, so this whole BI and analytics capability, and also DevOps and solution architecture, which I also think speak to the complexity in terms of integration. And if we embark into this digital world, how we make sure that all our applications are properly aligned and integrated, and for us to still get the biggest value and the best service back to the organization. So that's very interesting, and thank you so much for all of your answers. So I think let's discuss some of the areas a bit more closely. When we look at some of the key considerations and challenges that we might see in this IT function, especially I think, Kamal, if we start thinking about future staffing and skills planning. So we all live with this long history of legacy systems, and we see that in most of the organizations where there's complex integration models, there's little room for scale and agility, which is a hot topic, I think, on everyone's mind at this point in time. So if we consider the rate and the implication of digital change in our organizations, what do you anticipate some of the greatest implications to be if we take a long view into the next 2 to 3 years, I think especially when it comes to infrastructure and resources? And what do you think the implication would be on our data center and infrastructure teams if we start talking about infrastructure and resources?
That's a very good question. Look, this is the world of virtualization, which is hitting strong and hard. And if you do a poll amongst your attendees today, I'm sure there are virtualization strategies in place. And my key thing is, whose data center is it anyway? With Amazon, with Google, with massive investment going on in the African continent as we speak, South Africa particularly, it's a matter of time before the data center, which many of us who've been around for a few decades now would recognize as being the heart of the IT organization, is no longer going to be even in the IT organization. Many years ago, when I started programming, those guys that were behind the locked doors in the mainframe data operations, you needed to be really, really good to them if you wanted anything to happen, because they ran the backups and they ran the batch jobs, and JCL, as it was called, job control language, they're all gone. So you have service providers, you can self-service on capacity, on processing power. So that entire data center, epicenter, if you want, of the IT organization is ready and able and in the process of being virtualized in many large organizations. This concept of software-defined network, software-defined everything is going to produce massive positive ROI for large organizations. Now, the immediate staffing implication to that is obviously, what do you do with the people that are typically in this organization that executed those what was then mission critical systems? Now, you don't need that big mix of operator heavy capability. Now, in that, when we start understanding how to solve this problem, that's one of the skills we need to decide to access through partners. The role then of the IT organization is to be able to manage those partners effectively, as opposed to execute those typically data center driven operations. So that's the first bit, where virtualization and software defined behavior, networks, data centers, and capability is going to have a big role on what the staffing mix looks like in IT organizations.
So Kamal, if we, and we had a question from the audience, but if we think about like virtualization and the data center of the future, and we think about, we perhaps bring the cloud conversation in. So if we think about having our infrastructure in cloud-based solutions that's situated elsewhere in the world, I mean, from a skills and capabilities perspective, what does that really mean? Do we get rid of our entire data center team, or do we upskill them to become business relationship managers where they can actually look at these other environments and be able to still get the performance and drive the performance that we need, where it's not always within their control, but rather with a third party?
You'd have to look at the latter. You must look at the latter, in being able to take the institutional knowledge that you've gathered, be it doing highly technical operational tasks, look at that institutional knowledge and how it can be taken further and reskilled, redeployed in the organization. It would be an absolute waste to not have those capabilities within your team any longer. Some of the skills may choose to do other things, may choose to live closer to the heart of the infrastructure, in which case you could move members of your team, and quite appropriately so, become extensions of your supplier network, which is also a good thing, because you're increasing the institutional knowledge of your supplier. Who, when we start talking about ecosystems, we're going to try and stop using the word supplier and start talking about partners, which is the more appropriate term to use.
And I think on that point, if we do move on to the ecosystems, I think it's clear from our conversation so far that we can definitely not embark on this digital transformation journey all on our own. So I definitely think we need the help of the crowds, to use that phrase. So how do we build this ecosystem and networks to really support and enhance this envisioned future IT function? And what do you think are some of the key or core capabilities that we would need in this future model?
So that's a good question, because here's what I think. I think that large organizations and IT organizations needn't have to worry about building these ecosystems, because they're being built, they're happening. It's a natural consequence of what's happening in the ICT and the digital sector right now. I think the challenge and the appropriate question for CIOs to ask themselves is, how do I connect and leverage what's going on in this ecosystem that's building around me? Now, two of the big brands have issued their trends or their vision for technology over the next year or 2 years. One speaks of an unbounded IT organization, which has as its heart dropping the walls between the IT organization internally and the supply network, and they're referring to connecting into this broad ecosystem. The other talks about ecosystems and macro systems, where they're both, though, recognizing the same phenomenon, which is your supplier, the makeup and the constitution of your supply network is moving away from these large monolithic organizations into these smaller niche specialist organizations that connect with each other as required and then service your particular problem, and then disconnect and do something else. So the challenge back to the IT organization is, how do they start changing how the interaction happens with the supply network? Now, South African organizations are notorious for a semi-adversarial relationship with their suppliers. And that's one of the biggest changes, this concept of true partnership, and it goes beyond risk sharing. This is co-creation of solutions. This is literally cohabitation, if you want, with your partners, and being able to work with small niche organizations as opposed to trying to transfer all delivery risk onto a big organization. These are some of the changes that we'd have to consider when it comes to re-engaging that ecosystem, Mariana. And I think it's going to be more and more relevant a conversation as you start getting into digital and innovation solutions, which are smaller, they're less monolithic, they're less huge, they don't require hundreds of people, they're driven based on design thinking, they're driven based on agile delivery methods. So it should become easier to focus with these new age ecosystem type supply networks.
Yeah, Kamal, I think there was a question, and maybe it links nicely in there. So someone asked, how do I get my resources skilled and freed up to focus on innovation versus just keeping the lights on? And maybe there's no direct link, but I think in terms of thinking about the innovation scenario, would you want to keep your current skills in-house and let them run with your innovation, or do you actually want to use this ecosystem that you create to bring in new and refreshed thinking and accelerate the process? What do you think would be a better approach, or is it perhaps a combination between the two?
Let me first try and answer the question that was posed, because I must say that if I had the answer to this, I'd can it and resell it and make a huge amount of money. This is a challenge with every single CIO right now, and it's not just a matter of freeing up the resources, as in people. It's also where the budgets unfortunately currently go because of the size of our technical debt in some institutions, because of the size of investment in not necessarily legacy systems, because we use that word with care. but it's systems of record. Many organizations have massive systems of record, which they still have to maintain because the business runs on it, and the majority of their budgets still go in there. Now, the tussle between resources, and I'm going to use the word broadly to include people and money, is going to be prevalent, I think, for the foreseeable future, because you can't drop one. The systems of differentiation and engagement, as they call, need those heavy, clunky systems in the back to work to actually differentiate and innovate. So the only thing that the CIOs are trying to do is to find more efficient ways of supporting, maintaining, and we come back to virtualization, trying to squeeze savings out of business today in order to free up funding to refocus on business of tomorrow. And this is an ongoing balance that needs to be played. And some of what we'll talk about a bit later on trying to take a portfolio approach on buy, hold, sell of your resources may help. But there is no silver bullet. This is the ongoing and very dynamic problem that CIOs are grappling with. If it's top of mind, and if you approach every investment and project and supply interaction with this as one of the priorities, i.e. we want to reduce the weighting between business of today in order to free up funds for the business of tomorrow, then you will succeed. If all that you're trying to do is to access more funds out of the business, it's obviously going to be harder to do. So your second question, Mariana, was where do you place this? Again, it would be a combination of things. Some organizations are experimenting, to my mind, very successfully with holding the innovative opportunities or the disruptive builds outside of the business. So it's almost building your business of tomorrow innovations outside the business of today and importing when they're ready. So that is, it's a model which some organizations are experimenting with. It could be the model of the future, where the skills, capability, and the culture of innovation may be easier to initiate and keep separately until innovations are ready, and then bring them in-house and make them mainstream. So again, it's about experimenting. It's about this concept of starting fast, learning, or failing fast and learning quickly, to be able to understand what works for each organization. The good thing, though, is that a lot of the new thinking on how to deliver and execute technology systems is about rapid delivery. So it does give you the opportunity to learn quickly.
That's fantastic. And I think we will see more and more of these ecosystem models. And I think it's going to be interesting to just keep abreast of what's happening in this space in terms of how we extend this network and how we really get to tap into this ecosystem of suppliers and partners, and just to get to that place of true value delivery. Kamal, just on your previous comment, so we had a question or a comment from Precious in the audience. She was saying, what are you referring to when you say virtualization? I suppose you are not referring to infrastructure virtualization.
So I guess when we talk about software-defined everything, a lot of the vision for this is about being able to take a CapEx heavy data center and transform it into an OpEx heavy service that is acquired from whether it's a multiple or a single data center supplier. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about software defined everything, where you could, as you can right now in smaller cases with Amazon and others, be able to control your workloads, control the computing power that you have based on the demands that you're placing. So when we talk about the impact of software-defined data centers, software-defined everything, that's what we're talking about.
That's very good. And I think that also actually links nicely to the next question. So we hear all these things about DevOps and Agile and fit for purpose and scalable applications. Old legacy systems and complex systems doesn't really work for us anymore. We need solutions and processing to be quick and agile and on the fly, an app to really solve everything, and a system to really differentiate, I think, business and just from a consumer perspective as well. So how do we deal with these crazy demands, and how do we anticipate the future IT organization to deal with these rapidly changing application landscape while keeping abreast of our IT organizational structures and the skills that we might need in this future organization?
So let me just try and deal with the DevOps point around staffing implications. So DevOps is a material impact on how IT organizations are arranged. Goes without saying, the bringing together, crashing, if you want, the development, production, testing into one team and getting them to iterate through solutions has been a big checkpoint in most IT organizations. And as much as you can design a process, and there are lots of methods and approaches for it, the biggest challenge here is the willingness and the culture of the IT teams to collaborate in the way that DevOps dictates. And this is the big thing. And from a staffing, the implications on staffing around DevOps, it's cultural. It's being able to get the production, development, testing people all to be in a scrum, if you want, in an agile version of what they typically do, is easier said than done. And when we consider what the staffing implications are, you have to bear this in mind, that you need a particular skill set to be able to deal with that. Does that cover the DevOps question?
I think it does. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about the application implication as well?
So the application side of things is quite interesting, right? Because you've got these. Most of us have grown out of the IT organizations where we've grown up with these large support organizations behind us, because you've had whether they outsourced or insourced, but you've had to support the systems of record, you've had to support your systems. And as we move more and more into the simpler digital world, there's less and less dependency on high support businesses, or big, large-sized support businesses. And again, the levels of change in those systems are also dropping. So the big implication of this app economy, as we've coined it some years ago, is the implication that has on the size and the skill set inherent in the support structures that you built over the many years. And the question now, similar to living in the data center world, is what do these people do, and how do you arrange them? What should they now do in your new organization? So if you move from an organization which has been, let's say, application support heavy to an organization that's now going to be application support light, because a lot more applications are being maintained on a software as a service model, etc. You need to decide how you're going to cultivate new skills out of the skills that you have. So the implication on the application environment is not to be underestimated. It may be a bit slower because not all of these big back office systems are going to be replaced immediately, but it is in the process of being realized.
That's very good. And Kamal, while you were talking about the applications, we got a question around DevOps. So sorry to take you back to DevOps, but the question was, how do companies adopt an agile DevOps model? Do they make use of third-party consultants to help the operational changes? Do you have any success stories to perhaps share with us?
I think there are a lot of success stories in play. There's a lot of success stories in play. And my only advice to this is to be very meticulous. By the way, there's also some horrific failures available for you. And my singular point of advice is to make sure the team properly understands. In fact, one of the things I'm going to be doing later on today is to be sharing with an IT organization the differences between design thinking and traditional approach. And they, it's not just another method. Agile is not just another method. It's a bit more than that. So invest in the team's understanding of it, and then select the projects. You've got to be able to, it's got to be appropriate for using the methodology. And that's where I've witnessed, if you want, one of the biggest failures is an inappropriate application of the method. So choose POCs, choose pilot cases that can be managed, manageable to the organization, and allow your team and leadership to understand it and be trained. It is useful to get people in that have done it before, but you should not be in a situation where you outsource it entirely. There's got to be a proper capacity transfer. So if you are doing the first particular agile development or deployment, it's very useful to have agile leadership, scrum masters, etc., who have done this before, so they can the transfer of capacity and the leadership to the new things is done appropriately. But don't outsource it entirely. You won't have the ongoing capability if you do that.
That's very good. And I think let's move on to our conversation around data. It's always a big conversation. So as we all know, data being the greatest company asset that we all have, I think there's several questions around it. So how do we better utilize this great asset to gain insights and help us to make better decisions? And I think if we talk about data, it's not only the actual data, it's much more than just analytics. I think it also perhaps covers things like artificial intelligence and robotics and Internet of Things. I think it becomes all interlinked. So Kamal, in your view, what do you think we need to consider or change in our approach of how we deal with data in this future organization? Do you think we need some special skills, perhaps a special kind of person to assist us? How do we deal with this data question?
I don't think it's a question anymore, right? So everyone is aware of the many billion devices that are predicted to be connected to the internet through the Internet of Everything and the Internet of Things. So we're living in this data economy, Mariana, where we've got no choice. We've got to do something. So whether we just store it and figure it out later or not, we can decide what we want to do. But we just have, we will be living with masses of data being produced by all of these devices. We're well into this maturing of the platform economy where businesses are going to be created just on the back of data. So we live in that world. Now, what does it mean for the IT organization? Maybe it answers some of the questions we had earlier on what do we do with these infrastructure guys once we do the software-defined data center? What do we do with the applications people when we go into these low support demand apps? This is where we need to skill up. The data scientists, the ability to understand machine learning for rote activities, the ability to understand the application of artificial intelligence, where I've seen in one of the trend documents that they're predicting that AI is the new UI. So artificial intelligence will be the way in which you interface. It uses interface with systems, which is quite a insightful point. So the need for new skills, absolutely. The need for the IT organization to be more tech savvy around managing data, what's happening in the data management, big data management world, what is happening around analytics, how to provide the users with actionable insights at the point at which data is produced. This is a massive pressure point. So we're rapidly moving away from BI. We moved away from BI. We jumped into analytics not too long ago. We are now sitting with artificial intelligence. We're talking about actionable insights, intelligence at the edge. All of these funky, fancy buzzwords is data. So the IoT wave that we see is really cool and exciting when it comes to these new sensors and wearables, etc. But where the rubber hits the road on IoT is on data. So the pressure on IT organizations to be able to deal with this, to now provide those insights to business is going to be intense. And ultimately the focus then becomes the skills, the staffing, the skills, whether through partnerships, whether through internally upgrading the skills that they have. They need to produce the technicians now that can handle and provide business with the immediate demands that they will have on insights from the volumes of data.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we had an interesting question from the audience as well. So they were asking, are data science a reality to be the hottest skill of the future? If we struggle with finding transformational skills, how do we start finding this new breed of skill?
So data scientist was touted as the sexiest job 2 years ago. I believe it's not so sexy anymore. It's being replaced by robotics and artificial intelligence. So I'm not so sure. But look, I think the question is very relevant, and it's if I can read that, it may not be a matter of finding the skills as much as it is a matter of building those skills in-house. it is a challenge, not just for the organization or the person who's just asked it. But I have witnessed some amazing skills being produced in places like CSR that are building amazing IoT type platforms with data science and scientist skills that go with it. The fact that it's difficult does not mean it's impossible. I know that sounds cliched, but it is something that we can't ignore. We have to apply ourselves to how we solve the problem, and whether they're transformation skills or not is a secondary question. We all have to be responsible and accountable for the transformation imperative. But the demands of IT organizations and the IT industry broadly on being able to produce, whether we call them data scientists or machine learning specialists or AI specialists, we can pick the tag, but we need people who know how to manage, handle, and process data, because that's what the new economy is going to be built on.
That's very good. I think another key hot topic, apart from data scientists being the sexiest skill set, is around security. And I think we've been talking about risk and security for so long. But Kamal, what is your perspective on changes and challenges that we might expect to see, especially when it comes to risk management and security? I know the audience actually indicated that we will see like cyber might be a great gap that might exist within our skill set. Do you think we have enough security experts to actually help us navigate this digitally connected virtual cyber world that we are entering into?
So no, I was part of a thought piece, I think it was 2 years ago, where global research showed that the biggest gap in new skills in the sector was in cybersecurity space. So it is a massive challenge for us. The more digital we get, the more vulnerable we get, unfortunately. More connected devices, etc. That's everyone's very, very aware of that fact. So how do we solve this problem is going to be an ongoing challenge, and it is not a challenge that organizations can solve on their own. So in the good old days of information security, we built massive firewalls and hope they keep everybody out. Then we moved into security operations centers where we were proactively monitoring the threats, penetration threats, etc., to our infrastructure. Now we into cyber intelligence centers where we not just monitoring our infrastructure, but we monitoring globally the trends and behaviors on the economy, and trying to predict what potentially could happen around cyber risk. And this is as good as it may get. I think we need to then understand exactly what information we are willing to make publicly available and what's not. Now, the definition of public and personal is also so rapidly changing, but that's what organizations are dealing with. So what do they build and secure and not put on the cloud and not put on the public domain? What do they do? How do they invest in these proactive cyber intelligence centers? Who do they partner with to do that? Because this is a classic partnering requirement. This is where if an organization goes about trying to invest in these like we used to, internally, you're going to fall short. Some of the best skills are being built in the big data centers, in the big telcos, and you'd have to find ways of partnering with them. But this is an ongoing risk, Mariana. As much as we are excited and enticed by the sexiness and the beauty of the digital stuff, this is something that from a business and organizational point of view, we have to bear in mind.
That's very good. And I see we are running a little bit low on time, so maybe we should schedule another session like this. But there was another concept that I think we can briefly just talk about, and that's around integration and this complexity that comes with the digital world when it comes to the integration of applications, and how do we get everything, data, cloud, and applications and everything just to be connected and working to still deliver that value and performance back to the organization.
Right. So this is an interesting phenomenon because a lot of us have grown up in this age where software suppliers sold us these phenomenally pre-integrated end-to-end, well, they're integrated from a transaction point of view, RPs or systems of record. And it was beautiful because it was one thing, we knew how to build the skills for it. And now as we're building through these application stacks, there's less homogeneous solutions that are in play. There are more third-party solutions, some are on the cloud, some are in the firewall, some are in both. So complexity is back. And we need to figure out how integration is going to manifest itself, whether it's cloud brokering, whether it's integrating one process across multiple applications, or data. Data is now resident for one transaction across multiple platforms and members of a value chain. So integration is back. Data integration, application process, whatever you want to call it, integration is back simply because we're being forced into a more fragmented environment. Best of breed, custom built, digital apps, mobile apps, etc., are starting to drive us in that fold. So the staffing implication comes back to architecture, comes back to integration capability, comes back to partnering with suppliers, turning suppliers into partners when it comes to building API libraries and the like. So it definitely has an implication on how we staff and how we architect our businesses.
That's fantastic. And I think that one of the other questions that came in from the audience, and it almost, I think, conclude the session for us, is how do we best identify the strength of resources, gaps, and how to cross and upskill them? HR is not always geared to assist with transformational skills and guidance. And I think that actually takes us into our next section that we wanted to go into. It's like, what do we do next? Now that we've seen all these considerations and we spoke about some of the key challenges, what do we do? How do we gear ourselves to be ready for the requirements and the challenges of this future organization?
Right. So what do we do next is a really good question. And I think for me, the first point of departure is not to assume that an organization has to fix this alone. This is a fundamental change. When we talk about converting suppliers to partners, when we talk about integrating into an ecosystem, there's a change that's happening around the IT organization, which CIOs and IT executives have to consider when you approach the staffing problem. So that's the first bit, is don't just think about this as recruiting and training people, because it's just not going to be possible given the speed of change and in some cases the variety of change that's going to happen. So the view that we'd like to communicate is to be very, very almost venture capitalist about how you deal with things. You treat your people as assets, firstly. And if you were a venture capitalist and you had a portfolio of assets, you'd have skill sets, and I'm talking about skills rather than people, but skill sets that would be in buy mode. So these are the new skills, the data scientists and the integration people that we spoke about just now. You'd have skills in hold mode, and you'd have skills in sell mode, like a venture capitalist would have a portfolio. And the science or the art that we need to figure out, and we'll share some of the thoughts with you, is how do you now figure out which are buy, hold, sell skills? And that's the process to embark on. Starting point is to build an inventory. If you've got assets, you have to understand what you currently have. And you have to try and get as granular as you can to understand it. So build an inventory of assets, not people, assets. So one person may have more than one skill, and view the skills as the assets that you want. You'd have to understand then, once you have this inventory of skills, how they map firstly to your current state. You'd have to define your current state and map these skills to them. So my current state is I've got XYZ ERP, I've got a different CRM system, I'm planning on this integration software, I'm planning to virtualize. How do these skills map onto my current state? And then what does a future state look like? Because business has got to help you figure that out. And when you've got a sense of the future state described in the same way as you did your current state, you can remap the skills inventory or the asset inventory that you've got. And this is the first place that you're going to see the deltas. What then happens is you need to understand where you have hold skills, for example. Do you hold them in your organization, or do you hold them with a business partner? So do you move some of them out to, like we said, the company is going to provide you a virtual data center or whatever else they provide you. When it comes to sell skills, what do you do with that? Do you get rid of them? Do you get them to take on different roles in the organization? Or do you retrain them, which could constitute some of the buy skills? And again, when it comes to buy, Can I use crowdsourcing for anything in the buy category? Can I use outsourcing for anything in the sell category so I can turn it up and down as I need it? That's the space we're in. So step one, understand that you can't do this alone and you'd have to build a network and capability around you. Step two is let's understand the inventory of your assets, and you can define what you want to call an asset. I'd suggest you call the skill sets the assets, because that's really the power that you want to retain. Step three is to then understand, based on your current state, how these assets map and support your current state. Step four is to know the future state and how the skill set maps. And then, of course, the last, fifth step is to understand how you pull all of this together to partnerships, to alternate resourcing models, and, of course, traditional resourcing models. Easier said than done, I know, but that's about as simple as a process would get. And then, as in good agile thinking, once you've done it all, keep doing it as long as you can to keep abreast of the changes.
That is incredible. Thank you so much, Kamal. It was truly such an honor to have you joining us and sharing some of your experiences and insights with us. I'm looking forward to many more. So thank you so much. I think someone in the audience just said, that is so interesting. So skills plans or skill plans should be aligned to our IT strategy and architecture plan. And I think that is such a valid comment. Sometimes we don't draw that line between strategy and actual skills and just capability planning.
Good.
So thank you very much. I think it was a really insightful morning. Thank you for sharing this time with us. I think as Kamal explained, the solution is, it seems simple, but I think there's two key things for me. So do a skills and capabilities assessment, understand your current state, understand the future state, and really understand how to deal with the gap that you might find in between. You can hop onto our website. It's www.marianacarroll.com, where you can find more information on assessments like that, and also some training, especially around cloud certification if you are interested. And we are really just honored, and it was an absolute privilege to have each one of you spending time with us this morning on this webinar. Kamal, thank you again very much for the great conversation. I hope we can connect with all of you soon again, and whether it's around cloud skills and capabilities, or whether it's around IT skills and capabilities of the future, or maybe just as one of our cloud courses. And I hope you will join our next online conversation. So thank you all, and have the best Friday ever.